Imagine waiting 19 years for someone you love, only to find them stepping off a train, looking at you like you're the most dangerous thing in the world. Jake McAllister was a retired bounty hunter with 14 kills on his conscience. Clara Hawkins was a woman running from a corrupt judge who had murdered her father, enslaved her sister, and hunted her across the frontier for nearly 2 decades. When their paths collide in a dusty Colorado town, 3 armed strangers are already watching from the shadows, and the local preacher is secretly reporting every move she makes. What happens next is a story of buried secrets, impossible choices, and a love that refused to die, no matter how much blood tried to drown it. Stay until the end, because the moment Clara holds a gun to her enemy's head, the decision she makes will change everything. The lesson: not all broken people stay broken. Sometimes the ones who've walked through the darkest fire are the only ones brave enough to fight for the light. The meaning. This story reminds us that redemption isn't given, it's earned. That love doesn't erase our past, but it can give us a reason to become better than what our past made us. And that real strength isn't about pulling the trigger, it's about knowing when not to. If this story moved something inside you, leave a comment and tell me. Would you have pulled that trigger? Hit like if you believe in second chances, share this with someone who needs to hear it today, and subscribe so you never miss a story that stays with you long after it ends. I'll see you in the next one. The Colorado sun pressed down like a branding iron on Jacob McAllister's shoulders as he stood on the depot platform at Silver Creek. Dust devils spun lazy circles across the tracks. The wooden planks beneath his boots creaked with the weight of too many summers, and somewhere behind him, a child laughed at something he could not see. Jake was 38 years old. His face had been carved by wind and sun into something hard, something that made strangers look away when they met his eyes. A long scar ran from his left temple down to his jaw, a souvenir from his last bounty that still ached when the weather turned cold. Gray streaked through hair that had once been black as coal, and his hands rested easy at his sides as he waited for his supply shipment. Ammunition, rope, tools for mending fences that did not truly need mending. He was not here to meet a bride. That was Edgar Thornton's business. The wealthy general store owner, 50 years old with a belly that spoke of too much good living, stood nearby clutching a photograph and sweating through his collar. Jake had built his ranch 15 miles outside of town, far enough that visitors were rare and questions rarer still. 5 years he had lived in that self-imposed exile, and 5 years he had told himself it was enough. The land was good, the cattle were healthy. Bill Hensley, his only hired hand, kept the loneliness at bay with his dry humor and steady presence. It was enough. It had to be enough. The train whistle screamed across the valley, and Jake squinted against the glare as the locomotive shuddered toward the station. Steam hissed like an angry cat. Metal groaned against metal. And then the passengers began to descend. 3 men stepped off first. Jake's spine straightened before his mind caught up with what his body already knew. Old instincts, the kind a man never truly buries, surged through him like creek water through a cracked dam. These men moved wrong. Their eyes swept the platform with the cold efficiency of hunters, cataloging faces, measuring threats, dismissing the weak. They wore long coats despite the brutal heat. Jake knew what those coats were hiding. One of them, lean and weathered with pale eyes that held no warmth, let his gaze pass over Jake, and then return. Hold. The man's head tilted slightly, like a wolf catching an unexpected scent. Recognition flickered in those cold eyes. He knows me, Jake thought, or knows what I used to be. The pale-eyed man murmured something to his companions, and all 3 moved toward the hotel without looking back. But Jake had seen the flicker, had felt the weight of that gaze. He filed this away in the part of his mind that never truly slept. Then the 3rd passenger car opened, and his attention shifted to something he could not name, drawn by a force older than instinct toward the woman descending the iron steps. She wore a traveling dress the color of dust and sage, practical and worn at the hems. Dark hair pinned beneath a modest hat that had seen better days. Sun-touched skin that spoke of mixed heritage, the kind that drew whispered comments in polite company, and worse, in impolite ones. She moved with careful grace, one hand gripping the rail as if the world might tip beneath her feet at any moment. And then she lifted her face toward the brutal Colorado sun. Jake's heart stopped beating. He knew that face, knew it the way he knew his own reflection in still water. Clara Jane Hawkins, the girl whose father's ranch had bordered his family's land in Tennessee. Clara, who had kissed him by Sweetwater Creek when they were young and stupid and certain that summer would last forever. Clara, who had vanished 19 years ago like smoke in a strong wind, leaving him with nothing but questions and a promise he had never stopped keeping. Her name escaped his lips before he could stop it. Clara. She heard him. Across the noise of the platform, across the distance and the years, she heard him speak her name. She turned. Their eyes met. And Jake watched fear flood her face like water filling a drowning man's lungs. Her lips moved, forming words he could barely hear across the chaos of the depot. "No, no, not you!" She stumbled backward, nearly fell, and collided with Edgar Thornton, who had been approaching with his photograph and his hopeful smile. Edgar steadied her with hands that trembled slightly from his morning whiskey. His face showed confusion, then irritation, then something like possession as he looked between Clara and Jake. "Miss Miller?" Edgar said, using what was clearly not her real name. "Are you quite all right?" Clara forced a smile onto her face. It was the most painful thing Jake had ever witnessed. She took Edgar's arm like a woman accepting a life sentence. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I am fine. Just tired from the journey." She let Edgar lead her toward his waiting wagon. She did not look back. Jake stood frozen on the platform as the wagon rattled away, his hands shaking for the first time in 5 years. Around him, the depot continued its ordinary chaos. Porters shouted prices for carrying luggage. Trunks thudded against weathered wood. The train wheezed and groaned like an old man settling into an uncomfortable chair. But Jake heard none of it. Why was she afraid of him? Not surprised, not confused, not even angry at being found after all these years. Afraid. The kind of fear that lived in the bones, that came from running so long a person forgot what standing still felt like. The 3 strangers had paused near the hotel entrance. The pale-eyed one, their leader, watched Clara's wagon disappear around a corner with the patient attention of a man who had all the time in the world. Jake heard the man speak to his companions, his voice carrying just far enough on the thin mountain air. "She has changed," the pale-eyed man said. "But that is her. We wait." Jake's blood went cold. Whatever Clara was running from, it had followed her here. And now she was riding toward a homestead 5 miles outside of town with a man who could barely protect himself from his own drinking habits, let alone a woman with hunters on her trail. Jake should walk away. Whatever trouble Clara had found, it was not his concern. He had built a life on the ashes of his old one, and that life did not include risking everything for a ghost from Tennessee. But his feet were already moving toward his horse. Some promises, it seemed, could not be buried. Not even under 5 years of silence and 15 miles of Colorado dirt. The ride back to his ranch would take less than an hour. He had until then to decide what he would do. He suspected the truth would be simpler and far more dangerous than anything he could plan. 19 years. 19 years since he had watched her walk away from that creek, her lips still warm against his memory. 19 years of searching, of wondering, of building walls high enough to forget. And now she had stepped off a train and looked at him like he was death itself come calling. Jake mounted his horse and turned toward home. Behind him, the pale-eyed man watched and smiled the smile of a predator who had just found his prey. The stranger's name was Silas Cain, and he had been waiting 12 years for this moment. He just had not expected the complication standing between him and his target. The Revenant, Silas said quietly to himself. Jacob McAllister, the one who got away. He touched the pocket where he kept his brother's last letter. The brother Jake McAllister had hanged in Montana all those years ago. This job, Silas decided, had just become personal in ways his employer would never understand. He smiled again and went inside to write a letter to Denver. The hunt was about to become very interesting indeed. 19 years was not enough to forget, just enough to turn memory into scar tissue. The sun had long since dropped behind the mountains when Jake reached his cabin. The familiar shapes of home emerged from the darkness like old friends. The barn where his horses nickered their greeting. The corral where his cattle had already settled for the night. The cabin itself with its chimney breathing thin smoke into the purple sky. Bill Hensley sat on the porch, whittling something that might have been a horse, or might have been kindling. His crutch leaned against the rail beside him, a reminder of the leg he had lost below the knee at Antietam. At 62 years old, Bill had seen enough war and loss to fill 3 lifetimes. His wife and son had died in a Comanche raid 20 years past. He understood grief in ways that required no explanation. Jake dismounted and led his horse to the water trough, taking longer than necessary with the familiar task. His hands still were not entirely steady. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Bill said without looking up from his whittling. "I did." Bill's knife stilled. He waited with the patience of a man who had learned that silence often drew out more truth than questions. Jake climbed the porch steps and dropped into the chair beside his friend. The cabin door stood slightly ajar, the way it always did. Jake could not sleep in enclosed spaces anymore, not since the time a bounty had locked him in a root cellar for 3 days. The nightmares from that experience still found him sometimes, clawing at the edges of sleep. "Woman I knew when I was barely a man," Jake finally said. "Thought she was dead or gone forever. She stepped off that train today, coming to marry Edgar Thornton. That drunk who owns the general store?" Bill whistled low. "Hell of a situation. She looked at me like I was the last person on earth she wanted to see." Jake stared out at the darkness gathering beyond the porch, like I was dangerous to her. Maybe you remind her of something painful. It was more than that. It was fear, the kind that comes from being hunted. Bill set down his whittling. His eyes, sharp despite his years, studied Jake's profile with the careful attention of a man who had learned to read people the way others read books. "Those 3 strangers who got off the train before her," Jake continued. "Hard men, armed under their coats. They were watching the crowd like wolves watching a flock of sheep. You think they are hunting her? I think they are the reason she ran all the way to Colorado to marry a man she has never met." Silence stretched between them. The night sounds of the ranch filled the space, crickets singing, horses shifting, the distant call of a coyote mourning something lost. "What are you planning to do?" Bill finally asked. "I do not know yet." Jake pushed off the porch rail and headed for the door. "First, I need to understand what I am dealing with." He paused with his hand on the doorframe, then turned back. "Bill, those men on the train. One of them looked at me like he knew me, like he recognized something. Your reputation? Maybe. Or something else." Jake shook his head. "I do not like not knowing. I have not liked that feeling since the day I hung up my guns." He went inside, leaving Bill alone with his whittling and his thoughts. That night, Jake could not sleep. He sat in the darkness of his cabin, staring at the locked box beneath his bed. 5 years since he had opened it. 5 years since he had touched what lay inside. The Colt Peacemaker. 14 notches carved into the grip. One for each man he had killed during his years as a bounty hunter. They had called him the Revenant back then, the one who returns from death. He brought in more wanted men, dead than alive, because dead men did not run, and dead men did not shoot back. He had been good at killing. Too good. The money had let him keep searching for Clara. Every town, every lead, every whispered rumor about a young woman from Tennessee who might have passed through years before. He told himself that was why he kept hunting men. for her, to fund the search. But the truth was darker than that. The truth was that somewhere along the way the hunting had become its own reason. The violence had filled something empty inside him. The killing had made him feel powerful in a world that had taken everything he loved, until the day he killed a 14-year-old boy. The kid had drawn on him outside a saloon in Montana. Just a boy playing outlaw, too young to know how fast real death could come. Jake's instincts had taken over before his mind could catch up. By the time he realized how young the boy was, the bullet had already punched through his chest. That was the day Jake had walked away, sold his reputation, bought land in Colorado with blood money, started building something instead of destroying it. But the Colt remained, hidden but not forgotten. Like so many other things, the memories came whether he wanted them or not. Tennessee, summer of 1868. He was 19 years old, certain he knew everything worth knowing about the world. Clara Jane Hawkins was 17, with dark hair that caught the sunlight, and a laugh that made everything else seem quiet by comparison. Her father's ranch bordered his family's land, and they had grown up in each other's shadows, never quite friends until the summer everything changed. He remembered the first time she looked at him different. They were standing in the shallows of Sweetwater Creek, water swirling cool around their ankles, and she had said something that made him laugh. When he looked up, she was watching him with an expression he had never seen before, something soft and hungry all at once. She kissed him that evening, rose up on her toes and pressed her lips to his, while the sun bled red across the horizon. Her mouth tasted like summer and honeysuckle and everything good in the world. "Promise me," she had whispered against his mouth. "Promise we will have a life together. I promise." He had meant it with everything he was. 2 weeks later, gunshots shattered the darkness of a September night. Jake had been away delivering cattle for his father, gone 3 days on the trail. When he rode home, smoke still rose from the Hawkins ranch. Clara's father lay dead in the dooryard, shot through the heart. The house had been burned to the foundation. Clara and her younger sister Ellie had vanished without a trace. The town said it was bandits, random violence in a lawless time. These things happened on the frontier. But Jake had never believed it. The killing had been too clean, too purposeful. Someone had wanted the Hawkins family eliminated. He searched for 2 years, spent every penny he had chasing rumors and dead ends. Finally, broke and desperate, he had taken up bounty hunting to fund his search. He never found her. Until today. Bill found him on the porch at dawn, coffee in hand, watching the eastern sky turn pink. "You did not sleep?" "No." Bill handed him a cup and settled into his usual chair. His whittling project from the night before sat on the rail, and Jake could see now that it was meant to be a horse. Not a bad likeness, actually. "If she has been running from something for 19 years, Bill said carefully, there is a reason she never came to find you. Maybe a good reason. Maybe she was protecting you by staying away." Jake sipped his coffee. It was bitter and strong the way Bill always made it. "Or maybe she was afraid of what I became." Bill was quiet for a moment, then he said, "You are not that man anymore, Jake. You have not been that man for 5 years. Have I not?" Jake set down his cup. "Those men on the train. Killers, all of them. And my first instinct when I saw them looking at Clara was not to call the sheriff or ride for help." "What was it?" Jake looked at his hands. The hands that had killed 14 men. The hands that still remembered exactly how to draw and fire faster than thought. "My first instinct was to figure out how to kill them before they could hurt her." Bill nodded slowly. "That does not make you a monster, Jake. That makes you a man who learned hard lessons about how the world works. Does it?" Jake stood and walked to the edge of the porch. "Where is the line, Bill? Between protecting someone and becoming the thing they need protecting from?" Bill did not answer. Some questions had no easy answers. "I am going into town," Jake said finally. I need to know what those men are after, and I need to know why Clara ran from me like I was death itself." He walked toward the barn to saddle his horse. Bill called after him. "Be careful, Jake. Whatever mess that woman brought to Silver Creek, it is bigger than one man can handle alone." Jake paused, but did not turn around. "I know," he said. "That is what scares me." He rode toward town with the sun at his back and dread coiling in his gut. Somewhere in Silver Creek, Clara was waking up in another man's house wearing another woman's name, waiting for hunters to find her. And Jake still did not know if he was part of her salvation or another threat she needed to escape. She had lived under false names so long she nearly forgot who she used to be. Clara woke before dawn in a bed that smelled of lavender water and old grief. The room Edgar Thornton had given her was fine enough, with lace curtains on the windows and a quilt that must have belonged to his dead wife. Everything in this house belonged to his dead wife. The woman's ghost lingered in every carefully preserved detail. Clara did not mind ghosts. She had been living with them for 19 years. She rose quietly, checking the window locks out of habit, measuring the distance to the ground. Second floor, but there was a trellis covered in climbing roses. She could make that jump if she had to. She had made worse. The burn scar on her left wrist ached in the morning chill. It always did when she was afraid. A permanent reminder of the day Silas Cain had held a hot iron to her skin, demanding to know where she had hidden the ledger books. She had not told him. She had screamed until her throat bled. But she had not told him. That was the day she learned that she was stronger than she had ever imagined. Stronger than the men who thought they owned her. Stronger than the fear that had ruled her life. But seeing Jake McAllister on that platform had tested that strength in ways she had not expected. 19 years since she had kissed him by Sweetwater Creek. 19 years since she had whispered promises against his lips and believed that the world was good and love was enough. She had been so young, so stupid, so certain that summer would last forever. Then the men in dark coats had come for her father, and summer had ended in blood and fire. Clara dressed quickly in the plain clothes she had brought from back east. Practical fabrics, dark colors, nothing that would draw attention. She had learned the art of invisibility over the years, how to move through crowds without being noticed, how to become whatever people expected to see. Edgar Thornton expected to see a quiet widow grateful for a second chance at respectability. Clara could play that role. She had played harder ones. She found Edgar in the dining room, already working through a plate of eggs and biscuits. His hands trembled slightly as he lifted his coffee cup, and Clara recognized the signs of a man who had started his day with something stronger than coffee. "Good morning, Miss Miller," he said, using the name she had given him in her letters. "I trust you slept well." "Very well, thank you, Mr. Thornton. Your home is lovely." The lie came easily. Truth had never kept her safe. Only lies had kept her alive. Edgar nodded, pleased by the compliment. It was Elizabeth's pride and joy, this house. She had an eye for decoration that I certainly lack. He gestured for Clara to sit, and a tired-looking housekeeper brought her a plate of breakfast. Clara ate mechanically, tasting nothing, her mind already working through the problems that had followed her from Denver. Silas Cain was here. She had seen him on the platform, had watched his pale eyes find her in the crowd. He had smiled at her, the same smile he had worn while pressing hot iron to her skin. If Silas was here, then Judge Ashford knew exactly where she was. The mail-order bride scheme had failed. Her attempt to disappear into the frontier had been nothing but a brief delay. They would come for her. The only question was when. And now there was Jake to consider. She had not expected to see him, had not expected him to be alive at all, truth be told. The bounty-hunting world was not kind to its practitioners. She had assumed the frontier had claimed him years ago. But there he was. Older, harder, scarred in ways that went deeper than the mark on his face. But still, Jake. Still the boy who had promised to come back for her. She had found him once, 12 years ago. Had tracked him across half the frontier, driven by something she could not name. Love? Hope? The desperate need to believe that one good thing from her old life had survived. She found him in Montana, in a town called Bitter Creek. He had a man at the end of a rope, a man who was begging, crying, pleading for mercy. Jake had been smiling. She watched him pull the rope tight and hold it until the man stopped struggling. Watched him stand there with satisfaction on his face while a human being died at the end of his arm. That was when Clara had understood the truth. The boy she had loved was gone. The man who remained was a monster, no different from the ones who had destroyed her family. She had run back into hiding, back into the shadows, back into the endless game of survival that had become her life. But she had never forgotten his face, never stopped wondering if she had been wrong about what she saw. Now he was here, and she had to decide what to do about it. "I thought I might show you around town today," Edgar was saying. "Introduce you to some of the better families. The Reverend's wife is particularly eager to meet you." Clara forced herself to focus on the conversation. "Of course. That sounds lovely." She spent the morning playing the role of eager bride-to-be. She smiled at the appropriate moments. She admired Edgar's general store with its carefully organized shelves. She nodded politely when the Reverend's wife, a thin woman with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, explained the importance of church attendance in a civilized community. All the while, Clara was watching, counting, planning. She saw Silas Cain twice, moving through town with the casual confidence of a man who had nothing to fear. His two companions stayed close, their eyes constantly scanning. They knew she had seen them. They wanted her to know they were watching. It was a message, a threat. "Surrender now, and we might let you live a little longer." Clara had received such messages before. She had never surrendered yet. The Reverend himself stopped to greet them outside the church. Nathaniel Crane was a soft-spoken man with gentle eyes and a warm handshake. Everything about him spoke of comfort and safety. Clara did not trust him for a second. "Miss Miller," Crane said, holding her hand perhaps a beat too long, "what a pleasure to welcome you to our little community. I do hope you will find peace here." "Thank you, Reverend. I am sure I will." But even as she spoke, something about Crane nagged at her attention. The way he moved, the way his eyes tracked across the street, marking the positions of Silas and his men without seeming to notice them at all. Preachers did not move like that. But men who had once worn guns did. She filed the observation away for later consideration. It was late afternoon when she finally found a moment alone. Edgar had business to attend to, and Clara had claimed a headache that required rest. Instead of returning to the house, she slipped out the back door and made her way through the alleys of Silver Creek. She needed to reach the cemetery. Her money and documents were buried there, hidden in a place no one would think to look. Without them, she had no options. She was halfway through a narrow passage between the livery stable and the blacksmith shop when a voice stopped her cold. "Clara." Jake stepped out of the shadows. He looked different in the daylight than he had at the depot. More tired, more human. The scar on his face caught the afternoon light, a map of violence written across his skin. She should run. Every instinct she had cultivated over 19 years was screaming at her to run, but her feet would not move. "Stay away from me," she said. "You do not understand what you are getting into. Then make me understand." Jake took a step closer. 19 years, Clara. I searched for you. I spent every penny I had trying to find out what happened to you. I deserve something. Even if it is just the truth. The truth. Clara almost laughed. The truth would get him killed. But something in his eyes stopped her. Something that looked almost like the boy she had loved, buried underneath all those years of violence and pain. She made a decision then, a calculated risk. She would tell him part of the truth, just enough to make him sympathetic, just enough to make him useful if she needed him. She had learned long ago that truth could be a weapon if wielded correctly. "My father saw something he should not have," she said. "Men with power wanted him silenced. They killed him and took my sister and me prisoner." Jake's face hardened. "Who? Who did this? A man named Ashford. Cornelius Ashford. Clara let her voice tremble slightly, playing on Jake's protective instincts. He is a judge now, powerful, connected. He has been hunting me for years. She watched Jake process this information, watched his hands curl into fists at his sides. Those men on the train, they work for him? Yes. Clara allowed a tear to escape, just one, carefully calculated. They will kill me if they catch me. But first they want something I took from Ashford, something that could destroy him. Jake's eyes narrowed slightly. What did you take? Clara hesitated. She had not planned to tell him this much, but there was something in his expression, a sharpness that had not been there a moment before. He was testing her, seeing if her story held together. She had to be careful here. One wrong word and he would know she was not telling him everything. Documents, she said. Records of his crimes. I stole them when I escaped. And where are these documents now? Safe. Clara pulled back, rebuilding her walls. They are the only reason I'm still alive. Jake studied her for a long moment. She could not read his expression, could not tell if he believed her or saw through the half-truths she had woven. I am not asking for your help, she said finally. I am asking for one thing. Pretend you do not know me. Stay away from me. Let us both live. She turned to walk away. Clara. She stopped but did not turn around. You said those men have been hunting you for years. Jake's voice was quiet, thoughtful. But you chose to come here, to this town, to marry a stranger. She did not respond. That means you are out of options. That means whatever you are running from, it finally caught up to you. Clara closed her eyes. He was smarter than she had given him credit for. Goodbye, Jake. She walked away without looking back. She could not afford to look back, because if she did, she would see what she could not afford to acknowledge. After 19 years, his face was still the only thing that made her want to stop running. From the shadows of the church doorway, Reverend Nathaniel Crane watched them both. His hand moved across a small notebook, recording everything he had observed. Later that evening, he would write a letter to Denver. A letter that would reach Judge Cornelius Ashford within the week. The letter would say that Clara Jane Hawkins had made contact with a former bounty hunter named Jacob McAllister, that the situation had become complicated, that additional resources might be required. Crane sealed the letter with steady hands. He felt no guilt about what he was doing. Family was family, after all. And his brother had built something magnificent in Denver, an empire that would reshape the entire territory. A few more bodies along the way were simply the cost of progress. The Lord worked in mysterious ways, Crane thought as he walked the letter to the post office. And so did the Ashford family. He had been the best tracker in the West. He forgot that prey can become predator. Jake spent the night after his conversation with Clara sitting on his porch, turning over her words like a man examining a suspicious coin. She had told him enough to explain her fear. A powerful enemy, stolen evidence, hunters on her trail. But she had not told him everything. He had seen it in the way her eyes shifted when he asked about the documents, in the slight hesitation before she answered, in the careful construction of her story, each piece fitting too neatly into place. Clara Jane Hawkins had learned to lie over the past 19 years. She had learned to lie very well. The question was whether her lies were meant to protect him or protect herself from him. Bill brought him coffee at dawn, settling into the chair beside him with the ease of long habit. You did not sleep again. No. You going to tell me what has got you wound so tight? Jake told him about the conversation in the alley, about Clara's story of a powerful enemy named Ashford, about the documents she claimed to have stolen. Bill listened without interrupting, his weathered face giving nothing away. You believe her? He asked when Jake finished. I believe she is running from something. Jake stared into his coffee cup. I believe those men are dangerous. Beyond that, I do not know what to believe. But you are going to help her anyway. Jake did not answer. They both knew the answer. "I am going to town," he said instead. "I need to find out more about these men. And about this Ashford she mentioned." Bill nodded slowly. "Watch your back, Jake. You have been out of the game for 5 years. Maybe you have lost a step. Maybe I have." Jake stood and stretched. "Or maybe some things you never forget." He rode into Silver Creek with his senses sharp and his hand never far from the Colt on his hip. The morning crowd was already gathering at the general store and the blacksmith shop. Ordinary people living ordinary lives. They nodded at Jake as he passed, recognizing him as the quiet rancher who kept to himself and paid his bills on time. None of them knew what he used to be. None of them knew the blood on his hands. He tied his horse outside the saloon and went inside. The Lucky Strike was nearly empty at this hour, just a few old-timers nursing morning whiskey and a card game in the corner that looked like it had been going since yesterday. The bartender, a thick-armed man named Dutch, nodded at Jake as he approached. "Coffee," Jake said. Dutch poured without comment. Jake settled onto a stool where he could watch the door and let the silence stretch. Dutch was a man who appreciated silence. He was also a man who heard everything that happened in Silver Creek. "Those 3 strangers who came in on yesterday's train," Jake said eventually. "Know anything about them?" Dutch's expression did not change. "They are paying cash, staying at the hotel, asking around about some woman from back east." "What woman?" "A runaway wife, they say. Her husband in Denver wants her back." Dutch shrugged. "That is what they say anyway." "You do not believe them? I have been tending bar for 30 years. Dutch wiped down a glass that was already clean. "I know what men look like when they are trying to get their wives back. And I know what men look like when they are hunting someone." Jake nodded slowly. "Anyone else in town asking questions about them?" Dutch hesitated. Then he said, "Territorial Marshal came through yesterday. Burke is his name. Had a warrant for someone named Sarah Miller." Jake's grip tightened on his coffee cup. Sarah Miller. The name Clara had given Edgar Thornton. "What kind of warrant?" "Murder." Dutch lowered his voice. "They say she killed her husband back in Denver. But here's the thing. Those 3 strangers, they are not lawmen. And Marshal Burke did not seem too happy to see them here." Jake finished his coffee and laid a coin on the bar. "Thank you, Dutch." He found Marshal Burke at the sheriff's office conferring with the elderly local lawman about some unrelated matter. Burke was a lean man in his middle 40s, with the careful eyes of someone who had learned to see everything and trust nothing. Jake waited until the sheriff stepped out before approaching. "Marshal Burke, I am Jacob McAllister. I have a ranch outside of town." Burke looked at him with sudden interest. "McAllister. I have heard that name before. A lifetime ago. The Revenant." Burke's expression was unreadable. "They said you retired. 5 years now." The silence between them stretched tight. 2 dangerous men measuring each other. "Those 3 men who came in on yesterday's train," Jake said finally. "You know who they work for?" "I might." "Judge Cornelius Ashford. Denver." Burke's eyes narrowed. How would a retired bounty hunter know about Ashford's business? "Because the woman they are hunting used to mean something to me. A long time ago. Sarah Miller." Jake shook his head. "That is not her real name. Her real name is Clara Jane Hawkins, and I do not believe she killed anyone who did not try to kill her first." Burke studied him for a long moment. Then he pulled a folded paper from his coat and laid it on the desk. "This is the warrant for Sarah Miller. Murder in the 1st degree. Victim was her husband, Robert Whitmore." Jake looked at the warrant without touching it. "But here's the thing," Burke continued. "I have been a marshal for 20 years. I know what a clean warrant looks like, and I know what a bought warrant looks like. This one smells like money. You think Ashford had it arranged. I think Judge Cornelius Ashford has a lot of power in Denver. I think he has connections to people who do not ask questions about where their orders come from. And I think those 3 men are not here to bring a murderer to justice." "Then why are they here?" Burke folded the warrant and tucked it back into his coat. "I do not know yet. But I intend to find out." He looked at Jake with something approaching respect. You did not come here to ask me about the warrant, McAllister. You came here to see if I could be trusted, can you? Burke considered the question. When the law serves justice, I serve the law. When the law serves money, I serve justice. It was the kind of answer that could mean anything. But Jake had been reading men for a long time, and something in Burke's eyes spoke of genuine conviction. Watch yourself, Marshal. Jake moved toward the door. Those men know I have taken an interest in Miss Hawkins. They will be watching me. I know how to watch without being seen. Burke called after him. And McAllister, if you find any real evidence against Ashford, I want to see it. Jake paused at the door. Why? Because if that woman has what I think she has, it could bring down half the corrupt officials in Colorado. Burke's smile was thin and cold, and that is a prize worth risking my badge for. That night, Jake did something he had not done in 5 years. He broke into a man's room. Silas Cain was staying at the Silver Creek Hotel, the nicest of the town's 2 options for temporary lodging. Jake waited until he saw Cain leave the hotel with his 2 companions, heading toward the saloon for their evening drinks. Then he slipped around to the back of the building and climbed up to Cain's window. The lock was simple. Jake had it open in seconds. The room was sparse and neat, the belongings of a man who traveled light and traveled often. A few changes of clothes, a rifle case, a box of ammunition, and letters. Jake found them in a leather satchel hidden beneath the mattress, a stack of correspondence written in a careful, educated hand. The signature at the bottom of each one was simply 2 initials, C. a Cornelius Ashford. Jake read quickly, memorizing the important details. The letter spoke of a woman who had stolen something valuable, something that could ruin everything Ashford had built. The letters spoke of recovery, not elimination. Ashford wanted this woman brought back alive. He needs her to testify that she killed her husband. Jake understood suddenly. This was not about murder. This was about silence. Ashford had killed someone and framed Clara for it. Now he needed her to confess, to take the blame, to protect him from whatever evidence she had stolen. If she confessed, she would hang. If she refused, she would disappear. Either way, she would be silenced. Jake was replacing the letters when he heard footsteps in the hallway. He moved without thinking, sliding beneath the bed just as the door opened. From his hiding place, he saw boots crossing the floor. Cain's boots, distinctive with their silver stitching. Cain stood still for a moment as if sensing something wrong. Then he moved to the window Jake had entered through. The window was still slightly ajar. Jake had not had time to close it completely. Cain chuckled softly. It was not a pleasant sound. "The Revenant," he said to the empty room. "I wondered when you would show up." He walked to the bed and sat down. The frame creaked under his weight, inches from Jake's face. "My employer thinks you are a complication," Cain continued. "But I think you are an opportunity. I have been waiting 12 years for this, McAllister." Jake held perfectly still, barely breathing. "You probably do not remember my brother, Samuel Cain, Bitter Creek, Montana, 1875. Cain's voice was conversational, almost friendly. "You hanged him outside the saloon. Made quite a show of it, from what I heard." Jake remembered. He remembered every man he had killed. Samuel Cain had murdered a family in Wyoming, parents and 3 children. The youngest had been 4 years old. "I was in prison when it happened," Cain continued. "By the time I got out, you had disappeared. Gone to ground somewhere no one could find you." He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the night. "But now, here you are. And here I am. And between us is a woman who means something to both of us." Cain was quiet for a moment. "I am going to enjoy this," he said finally. "But first, I need to send a letter to Denver." He left the room, closing the door behind him. Jake waited a full 5 minutes before sliding out from under the bed. His heart was pounding, but his hands were steady. Cain knew he was here, knew he was involved. And Cain had a personal vendetta that went far beyond his employer's interests. Jake slipped out the window and dropped to the ground below. As he landed, something fell from his coat pocket. A button. One of the silver buttons from his jacket. He did not notice the loss until he was already riding back toward his ranch. By then it was too late. Silas Cain found the button the next morning. He held it up to the light, examining the distinctive pattern. Then he smiled. The game, it seemed, was truly beginning. Sometimes the enemy of your enemy is not a friend, just someone who has not stabbed you yet. Clara made her move 3 nights after arriving in Silver Creek. She waited until Edgar Thornton had drunk himself to sleep, which happened reliably by 9 o'clock each evening. Then she slipped out the back door and made her way through the darkness toward the cemetery. Her documents were buried there, hidden in a place no one would think to look. A small oilskin package containing everything she needed to survive. Money, false papers, and most importantly, the key to a safe deposit box in San Francisco where the real evidence against Ashford waited. The ledger books themselves were too dangerous to carry. She had learned that lesson the hard way. But the key to where they were hidden, that she kept close. The cemetery was quiet and dark, the headstones casting long shadows in the moonlight. Clara found the marker she was looking for, a simple cross bearing the name of someone who had never existed. She had paid the gravedigger in Denver to create the false grave years ago. She was on her knees, digging in the soft earth at the base of the cross, when she heard movement behind her. 2 men emerged from behind a large monument. She recognized them immediately, the 2 hired guns who traveled with Silas Cain. "Going somewhere, Miss Miller?" one of them asked. Clara did not hesitate. She had survived 19 years by never hesitating. She threw the handful of dirt she was holding into the nearest man's face and ran. She made it maybe 20 feet before the second man caught her. His arms wrapped around her from behind, lifting her off her feet. She kicked and clawed and bit, drawing blood from his hand when he tried to cover her mouth. "Damn wild cat," he snarled. "Hold still, or I will break your arm." But Clara did not hold still. She had learned long ago that submission meant death. She had the scars to prove it. She was still fighting when a third figure emerged from the darkness. Jake McAllister moved like a ghost, silent and deadly. His fist connected with the first man's jaw before the hired gun had even fully turned around. The man dropped like a sack of grain. The second man threw Clara aside and went for his gun. He never got it clear of the holster. Jake was on him in 2 steps, driving a knee into his gut and an elbow into the back of his neck. Both men lay unconscious in the dirt. Jake stood over them, breathing hard, his eyes wild with something Clara had not seen in them before. "Are you hurt?" he demanded. Clara picked herself up, brushing dirt from her dress with shaking hands. "No." "Thank you." Jake grabbed one of the unconscious men by his collar and dragged him to the base of a headstone. He pulled rope from his belt and began tying the man's hands behind his back. "What were you doing out here alone?" he asked without looking at her. "I could ask you the same question." "I have been watching Thornton's house every night since you arrived." Jake finished with the first man and moved to the second. "I figured you would try something like this eventually." Clara stared at him. "You have been watching me?" Someone had to. There was something in his voice that made her chest tighten. Not accusation, not anger, something else entirely. The second man groaned and began to stir. Jake slapped him hard across the face. "Wake up! I have questions." The man's eyes focused slowly on Jake's face. Recognition dawned, followed quickly by fear. "McAllister," he breathed. "The Revenant. I do not use that name anymore." Jake drew his knife and held it where the man could see it. "But I still remember how to make men talk. So let us save ourselves some time." The interrogation was quick and brutal. Not physically brutal, Jake never touched the man with the knife. But the threat of what he might do hung in the air between them like smoke. "Judge Ashford is paying $5,000 for her alive," the man admitted. $10,000 if she dies resisting capture. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. He had raised the price. "What does he want with her?" Jake asked. "She stole something from him. Documents. He needs her to tell him where they are." "And then?" The man's eyes flick to Clara and back to Jake, and then she confesses to killing her husband, takes the blame, hangs for it. So Ashford walks free, Jake said quietly. The man shrugged. That is above my pay grade. I just do what I'm told. Jake looked at Clara. His expression was unreadable. Is this true? Clara held his gaze. Yes. You stole documents from Ashford. Yes. And your husband? Clara's jaw tightened. Robert Whitmore was never my husband. He was Ashford's man, assigned to watch me. When he found out I had taken the ledger books, he tried to kill me. I defended myself. She waited for Jake to respond, for him to ask more questions, to doubt her story, to demand the whole truth. Instead, he hit the bound man on the back of the head, knocking him unconscious. We need to move, he said. Cain will come looking for these two when they do not report back. They rode through the darkness, pushing the horses hard through rough country. Clara's mount stumbled once on the uneven ground, and Jake caught her reins before she could fall. There is a cabin, he said, abandoned mine shack in the hills. We can rest there until dawn. The cabin was little more than 4 walls and a roof, long since picked clean by scavengers and weather, but it had a door that closed and windows that watched the approach from all directions. Jake built a small fire while Clara caught her breath. You said Ashford killed your father, Jake said, not looking at her. Because of something he saw. Yes. Clara wrapped her arms around herself. My father discovered that Ashford was using our land as a waypoint for his operations. Moving people across the territory, selling them. Jake's hands stilled on the kindling. Trafficking. Yes. Clara's voice hardened. Men, women, children. Hundreds of them over the years. My father was going to report what he had found to the territorial marshal, but Ashford found out first. He sent men in the night. They killed my father. They took my sister and me. Clara stared into the growing flames. I spent 10 years as Ashford's prisoner. 10 years recording his crimes, managing his books, watching him sell human beings like cattle. And all that time, Ellie was held somewhere I could not reach her. His insurance policy to make sure I stayed compliant. Where is your sister now? Still in Denver? Clara's voice cracked. Still his prisoner. If I surrender, he kills her. If I run, he kills her. I've been trying to find a way to save her without dying myself. And the documents? I memorized everything. Every transaction, every name, every body buried to keep Ashford's secrets safe. Then I stole the original ledger books and I ran. She finally looked at Jake. Those documents can destroy him. They can bring down half the corrupt officials in the territory. But as long as he has Ellie, I cannot use them. Jake was quiet for a long moment. The fire crackled between them. I will help you, he said finally. Clara shook her head. You do not understand what you are offering. Ashford has money, power, connections. He will destroy anyone who gets in his way. I understand exactly what I am offering. Jake met her eyes. I am offering to do what I should have done 19 years ago. Fight for you. Clara felt tears burning at the corners of her eyes. She had not cried in years, had not allowed herself that weakness. Why, she whispered, why would you risk your life for me? Because I made you a promise once. Jake's voice was rough. Because I have spent 19 years wondering what happened to you. Because when I close my eyes at night, I still see you standing by that creek in Tennessee. He stood and walked to the window, staring out at the darkness. And because maybe this is my chance to prove that I am not the monster I became. Clara rose and crossed to stand behind him. I found you once, she said quietly, in Montana 12 years ago. Jake went very still. I tracked you for 6 months, followed rumors and whispers until I found the town where you were working. Clara's voice trembled. You had a man at the end of a rope. He was begging for his life. And you were smiling, Jake. She saw his shoulders tense. I saw what you had become, and I ran. I ran because I was more afraid of you than I was of Ashford." Silence stretched between them. When Jake finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. His name was Samuel Cain. He killed a family in Wyoming, parents and 3 children. The youngest was 4 years old. Clara closed her eyes. "I was not smiling because I enjoyed watching him die," Jake continued. "I was smiling because justice was finally being done, because for once the monster was punished instead of going free." He turned to face her. "But you were right to run. What I became during those years was something dark, something that scared even me. That is why I stopped. That is why I walked away." Clara looked at him, really looked for the first time since she had arrived in Silver Creek. She saw the scars on his face and hands, the gray in his hair, the weight of years in his eyes. But she also saw something else, something she had not expected to find: pain, guilt, the desperate longing for redemption. He was not a monster. He was a man who had done monstrous things and hated himself for them. "I do not know if I can trust you," she said honestly. "I know." Jake's expression did not change. "I am not asking you to trust me. I am asking you to let me help. And what do you want in return?" Jake was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I want to understand why you never came to find me, why you chose to run instead of letting me protect you." Clara felt something shift inside her chest. A wall she had built years ago crumbling just slightly. "Because I thought you were dead," she said. "Because by the time I learned you were alive, I had already seen what the world had turned you into." She reached out and touched the scar on his face. "But I am starting to wonder if I was wrong." They reached Jake's cabin by dawn. Bill Hensley was waiting on the porch with his rifle and a pot of coffee. He took one look at Clara, one look at the blood on Jake's shirt, and nodded once. "I will make breakfast," he said. Over eggs and biscuits, Jake laid out what he had learned. Ashford's men. The warrant for Sarah Miller. Marshal Burke and his suspicions about bought justice. Bill listened without interrupting. "So we are going up against a territorial judge with unlimited resources and hired killers on his payroll," Bill said when Jake finished. "With what exactly? 2 guns and a woman's word?" "We have the documents," Clara said. "Once they are in the right hands, Ashford is finished. But we cannot use them while he has your sister." Bill shook his head. "It is a standoff." "Then we change the terms," Jake said. "We rescue Ellie. We get the documents to someone who can publish them. And we bring Ashford down before he can hurt anyone else." Bill studied him for a long moment. Then he looked at Clara. "Miss Hawkins, is this man worth dying for?" Clara met Jake's eyes across the table. "I do not know yet," she said honestly. "But I think he might be worth living for." Bill snorted. "Good enough, I suppose." He stood and began clearing the dishes. "I will start preparing supplies. If we are going to war with a territorial judge, we had best be well provisioned." Jake caught Clara's arm as she rose to help. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For giving me another chance." Clara looked at him, at this man she had loved as a girl and feared as a woman. "Do not make me regret it." She went to help Bill with the dishes. Behind her, Jake watched her go with something like hope burning in his chest. It was a feeling he had not experienced in a very long time. Outside, the sun was rising over the Colorado mountains, and somewhere in Denver, Judge Cornelius Ashford was receiving a letter that would change everything. The letter was from Silas Cain. It told Ashford that his prey had found a protector. It also told him that Cain had unfinished business with that protector, business that had been waiting 12 years for resolution. Ashford read the letter twice. Then he smiled and began making preparations. If Clara Jane Hawkins wanted war, he would give her war. And when it was over, there would be nothing left of her or anyone who had tried to help her. Some men kill with knives. Some kill with pens. Ashford did both and smiled while doing it. Judge Cornelius Ashford arrived in Silver Creek exactly 1 week after Clara had stepped off the train. He came with an entourage of 12 men, an elegant carriage polished to mirror brightness, and a smile that would have charmed the devil himself. His white gloves gleamed in the morning sun as he stepped down to greet the townspeople who had gathered to see the important visitor from Denver. The judge was campaigning for the territorial legislature, his supporters said. He wanted to meet the good people of Silver Creek. He wanted to hear their concerns and win their votes. Clara watched from the window of Edgar Thornton's house as Ashford worked the crowd in the town square. Her hands were shaking, though she told herself it was from cold. 8 years since she had seen that face. 8 years since she had watched those gentle hands sign documents that condemned human beings to slavery. 8 years since she had heard that soft voice ordering her torture. He looked exactly the same. The distinguished gray hair, the kindly expression, the modest bearing of a man who wanted nothing more than to serve his community. No one looking at him would ever guess the truth. "Miss Miller?" Edgar's voice came from behind her. "Are you quite well? You look pale." Clara forced herself to turn away from the window. "I am fine. Just tired." Edgar nodded, his face showing relief. He had been looking for an excuse to end their engagement ever since rumors had started circulating about her past. Clara did not blame him. Edgar was a coward, but he was not a fool. "The judge is holding a reception this evening at the hotel," Edgar said. "I thought we might attend together. Show the community that you are a respectable woman." "Of course." Clara's voice was steady, though her stomach churned. "That sounds lovely." She spent the rest of the day preparing, not for the reception, but for what would come after. Jake had been sending messages through Bill Hensley, who came into town each day for supplies. The messages were brief and coded, but Clara understood their meaning. Hold position, watch and wait. Do not engage. He was gathering information, looking for weaknesses in Ashford's defenses. Clara knew she should trust his judgment. Jake had spent years hunting dangerous men. He knew how to pick the right moment, but holding position was the hardest thing she had ever done. The reception that evening was everything Clara had expected. Silver Creek's wealthiest citizens gathered in the hotel's modest dining room, drinking punch and pretending they were in San Francisco instead of a frontier mining town. Ashford moved through the crowd like a shark through calm water, shaking hands and smiling at jokes and promising better roads and lower taxes. Everyone loved him. Everyone trusted him. Clara stayed close to Edgar, playing the role of dutiful bride-to-be, while her eyes tracked Ashford's movements around the room. Then she saw something that made her blood run cold. Reverend Nathaniel Crane had approached Ashford near the window. Their conversation looked casual enough, two respectable men discussing local matters. But Clara saw the way Crane leaned in close, saw the way Ashford's hand touched Crane's shoulder in a gesture that was far too familiar. She knew that gesture. Ashford used it with people he considered his inner circle, people he trusted completely. Crane was one of his. The realization hit Clara like a physical blow. The kindly preacher who had welcomed her to Silver Creek, who had asked after her health and offered her a place in his congregation. He had been reporting on her from the moment she arrived. She had been watched from the inside. "Miss Miller?" Clara started. Ashford himself was standing in front of her, his hand extended, his smile warm and welcoming. "I do not believe we have been formally introduced," Ashford said. "I am Judge Cornelius Ashford." Clara took his hand. The white glove was soft against her palm. "Sarah Miller," she said. "How do you do, Judge?" Ashford held her hand a moment too long. His eyes searched her face with an intensity that belied his pleasant expression. "You seem familiar, Miss Miller. Have we met before?" Clara's heart was pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. "I do not believe so, Judge. I have never been to Denver." "Curious." Ashford released her hand. "You remind me of someone. A woman who used to work in my household many years ago. I have one of those faces. Perhaps." Ashford's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered behind his eyes. "Well, Miss Miller, I hope you enjoy your time in Silver Creek. It is a charming little town, the kind of place where people can start fresh. He moved away to greet other guests. Clara excused herself and fled to the washroom, where she stood over the basin with her hands pressed to her face, trying to control her breathing. He knew. He absolutely knew. But he had not given her away, had not called for his men to arrest her on the spot. Why? The answer came to her slowly, chilling in its implications. He wanted her afraid. He wanted her to know that he could take her whenever he chose. He wanted her to understand that every moment of freedom was a gift he was allowing her to have. It was a game to him, a cat playing with a mouse before the killing strike. Clara straightened and looked at herself in the mirror. Her face was pale, her eyes too wide. She looked exactly like what she was, a terrified woman with nowhere to run. No, she was not that woman anymore. She had not been that woman for years. She had survived his torture. She had stolen his secrets. She had escaped his prison and stayed free for 8 years, while his hunters searched for her. She was not prey. She was a survivor. And she was done running. That night, after the reception ended, and Edgar had drunk himself to sleep, Clara slipped out of the house and made her way to the edge of town where Jake was waiting with horses. "He knows," she said without preamble. "Ashford knows who I am." Jake's expression darkened. "Did he threaten you?" "Not directly, but he made sure I understood." Clara climbed into the saddle. "He is playing with me. He wants me scared." "Are you scared?" Clara thought about the question. "Yes," she admitted, "but I am also angry, and right now, anger is more useful." They rode in silence for several miles before Jake spoke again. "I have been watching Ashford's men," he said. "Silas Cain has been making trips to the church every evening, meeting with Reverend Crane for what he calls spiritual guidance." Clara nodded grimly. "I saw them together at the reception." "Crane is one of Ashford's." "I know." Jake's voice was hard. "Bill has been digging into Crane's past. There are no records of him anywhere before 1880. He appeared in Silver Creek 7 years ago with letters of recommendation that no one could verify, because they were forged, almost certainly." Jake guided his horse around a fallen log. "The question is what to do about it. We cannot expose him yet. If Ashford knows we are onto Crane, he will accelerate his plans." "Agreed." Jake pulled his horse to a stop at the edge of a clearing. "But there is something else you should know." "What?" Jake turned to face her in the moonlight. "Marshal Burke came to see me today. He has been investigating Ashford quietly for months. He believes the judge is behind a network of human trafficking that spans the entire territory." Clara felt hope flicker in her chest. "Then he would be willing to help us?" "He wants to see your evidence first." Jake's expression was cautious. "And he wants something in return." "What?" "The name of the safe deposit box where you hid the ledger books." Clara shook her head immediately. "If Ashford gets that information, everyone I have worked to protect will die. Burke is not working for Ashford. You do not know that." Clara heard the steel in her own voice. "I have trusted the wrong people before. I will not make that mistake again." Jake studied her for a long moment. "Then we do this another way." He dismounted and tied his horse to a tree. "We rescue your sister. We get her somewhere safe. Then you decide what to do with the evidence." Clara dismounted beside him. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly. "You could walk away. No one would blame you." Jake's laugh was bitter. "You think I could walk away now? After everything?" He turned to face her, and in the moonlight she saw something raw and vulnerable in his expression. "I lost you once, Clara. I spent 19 years wondering what I could have done different, wondering if I could have saved you." He reached out and touched her face, his hand rough and gentle at the same time. "I am not losing you again. Not to Ashford, not to anyone." Clara closed her eyes. "Jake, I am not asking you to love me." Jake's voice was barely a whisper. "I am not even asking you to forgive me for what I became. I just need you to let me try to make it right." Clara opened her eyes and looked at him. At this man she had loved and lost and feared and found again. "All right," she said. "We rescue Ellie. We bring down Ashford. Together." "Together," Jake agreed. Behind them, hidden in the shadows of the tree line, a figure watched and listened. Silas Cain had followed them from town. He had heard everything, and now he had exactly what he needed to report to Judge Ashford. The trap was about to close. The next morning, two things happened that changed everything. Edgar Thornton publicly ended his engagement to Sarah Miller, citing rumors of her questionable past. The townspeople watched with a mixture of sympathy and judgment as Clara was ejected from Thornton's house with nothing but the carpetbag she had arrived with. And Bill Hensley was found on the road outside of town, shot twice in the chest and left to die in the dust. He was still alive when Jake reached him barely. Jake knelt in the dirt, cradling Bill's head in his lap, while Clara tried to stop the bleeding with strips torn from her dress. "Hold on, Bill." Jake's voice cracked. "Help is coming." Bill's eyes found Jake's face. Blood bubbled at the corners of his mouth. "Crane," Bill whispered. I found proof. His mother's maiden name was Ashford. "I know." Jake gripped Bill's hand. "We will get him. I promise." "No." Bill's grip tightened with surprising strength. "Not for me. For the girl." "What girl?" Bill's free hand fumbled in his pocket, pulling out a folded piece of paper. "Letter. From my granddaughter. Never got to meet her." Tears were streaming down Jake's face now. "I will find her," Jake promised. "I will tell her what kind of man you were." Bill smiled, blood staining his teeth. "You are a good man, Jake. Better than you know." Bill's eyes shifted to Clara. "Take care of him. He is worth it." His hand went limp. His eyes closed. Bill Hensley died in the dirt on a Colorado mountain road, killed by men who worked for a judge who called himself civilized. Jake held him for a long moment. Then he gently lowered Bill's head to the ground and stood. Clara had never seen a man transform the way Jake transformed in that moment. His face went hard and cold, his eyes flat and empty. The rancher disappeared. The bounty hunter remained. "Clara." His voice was ice. "Get to the cabin. Get to the... Lock the door. Do not come out until I come for you. Jake, wait." But he was already walking toward his horse, his hand on his gun, his mind somewhere she could not follow. "Jake, please." Clara ran after him and grabbed his arm. "This is what they want. They want you angry. They want you to make a mistake. They killed Bill." "I know." Clara's voice was steady despite her fear. "And they will pay for it, but not like this. Not in a way that gets you killed and leaves me alone." Jake turned to look at her. For a moment she saw the monster he had warned her about. The Revenant. The killer who had earned 14 notches on his gun. Then she saw something else. Something broken and hurting beneath all that rage. "He died for you," Jake said hoarsely. "They killed him because he was helping us. He died for both of us." Clara reached up and touched his face. "And the best way to honor that is to finish what we started. To bring down Ashford. To save Ellie. To make sure his death means something." Jake closed his eyes. "I do not know if I can do this without becoming what I was." "You can." Clara felt the truth of it in her bones. "Because I will be there to remind you." Silence stretched between them. The wind blew dust across the road where Bill's blood still stained the ground. Finally, Jake opened his eyes. "All right," he said, "we do this together." They buried Bill that afternoon, in a quiet spot under an oak tree behind Jake's cabin. There was no preacher, no hymns, just two people standing over a grave saying goodbye to a man who had deserved better. "I will not add another notch out of hatred," Jake said quietly. "But for justice, I will add as many as it takes." Clara took his hand. "Together," she said. "Together," he agreed. And somewhere in the valley below, Judge Cornelius Ashford was receiving the report from Silas Cain. "They buried the old man," Silas said, "and now they are planning something. The woman and the bounty hunter. Together." Ashford smiled and adjusted his white gloves. "Perfect," he said. "Let them plan. Let them hope." He looked out the window at the Colorado mountains. "It will make their defeat all the sweeter. Some nights last so long you think dawn will never come." This was one of those nights. 3 days passed after Bill's death. 3 days of planning, of preparation, of watching Ashford's men, watching them in return. Jake used the time to study their enemies' patterns. The judge kept a regular schedule, moving between the hotel and the church and various public appearances designed to win votes. His men rotated in shifts, always at least 4 guarding him, always armed, always alert. Silas Cain stayed close to Ashford's side, waiting. Clara used the time to reach out to Marshal Burke. Through careful coded messages passed through trusted hands, she laid the groundwork for what would come next. The plan was simple in theory, complex in execution. They would ride to Denver. They would rescue Ellie from wherever Ashford was holding her. They would get the evidence to Burke and let him take Ashford down through proper legal channels. Simple, clean. No one else had to die, except Jake knew better. Plans like this never survived contact with the enemy. On the 4th night, Clara found Jake sitting alone by Bill's grave. The moonlight turned everything silver and shadow. An owl called somewhere in the darkness. "You cannot sleep either," she said, settling onto the ground beside him. "I keep thinking about what I should have done different." Jake's voice was rough. "If I had been there, if I had not let him ride into town alone. You could not have known. Could I not?" Jake picked up a stone and turned it over in his hands. "I knew Cain was watching us. I knew they were looking for leverage. Bill was the obvious target." "Stop." Clara put her hand over his. "You are not responsible for what evil men do." "Am I not?" Jake looked at her, and in the moonlight she saw the weight of years in his eyes. 14 notches on my gun, Clara. 14 men I killed. Some of them deserved it. Some of them probably did not. But I pulled the trigger on all of them." Clara did not look away. "Why did you stop?" Jake was quiet for a long moment. "There was a boy," he finally said, 14 years old, playing outlaw with a gun he did not know how to use. He drew on me outside a saloon in Montana. I put a bullet through his chest before my brain caught up with my eyes." Clara closed her eyes. "His mother found him." Jake's voice was barely a whisper. "She held him in her arms and looked at me like I was the devil himself. And I realized she was right. That is exactly what I'd become." He threw the stone into the darkness. "I walked away after that. Sold my guns. Bought this land. Tried to become someone else. Did it work?" Jake laughed bitterly. "I thought it did. Until you stepped off that train and I realized the killer was still inside me, just waiting for a reason to come back." Clara turned to face him fully. "Do you want me to tell you that you are a good man? That none of that matters anymore?" "No." Jake met her eyes. "I want you to tell me the truth." Clara considered her words carefully. "The truth is that you have done terrible things, things that cannot be undone. But the truth is also that you are trying to be better, that you saved my life, that you buried your friend and wept for him, that you are sitting here in the dark torturing yourself for sins that many men would justify without a second thought." Jake said nothing. "The truth is that I do not know if you are a good man." Clara reached out and touched his face. "But I know you are not the monster you think you are. Monsters do not feel guilt. Monsters do not change." Jake closed his eyes at her touch. "Why did you run?" he asked. "In 1875, when you found me in Montana." "You know why." "Tell me anyway." Clara dropped her hand. "Because I saw you kill a man. Because you were smiling. because in that moment, you looked exactly like the men who murdered my father." Jake opened his eyes. "And now? Now I see someone who is trying to earn redemption." Clara's voice softened. "Someone who might actually deserve a second chance." Neither of them spoke for a long moment. The owl called again, closer this time. "I need to tell you something," Clara said finally. "Something I should have told you before." "What?" Clara took a deep breath. "The man you killed in Montana, Samuel Cain." Jake's body went rigid. He had a brother, younger. His name is Silas Cain. For a long moment, Jake did not move. "That is why Cain is here," Clara continued. "Not just for Ashford's money, for revenge. He has been waiting 12 years to find you." Jake's hands curled into fists at his sides. "How long have you known?" "Since Denver." Clara's voice was steady despite her fear. "I overheard Ashford talking about it, about how convenient it was that Cain's vendetta aligned with his needs. And you did not tell me. I was afraid." Clara met his eyes without flinching. "Afraid you would do something reckless. Afraid you would get yourself killed trying to settle old scores." Jake was on his feet suddenly, pacing like a caged animal. "He killed Bill because of me, because of what I did 12 years ago. You do not know that." "Do I not?" Jake's voice was harsh. "Bill is dead because Cain wanted to hurt me, because I gave him the weapon when I hanged his brother in Montana. Bill is dead because Ashford wanted to send a message." Clara stood and faced him. "Cain was just the instrument. Ashford is the one who gave the order." Jake stopped pacing. He stood with his back to her, his shoulders rigid with tension. "I should have told you," Clara said quietly. "I am sorry." Silence stretched between them. When Jake finally spoke, his voice was calmer, more controlled. "We leave for Denver tomorrow night. Are you sure you are ready?" Jake turned to look at her. In the moonlight, she saw something new in his expression. Not the cold emptiness of the killer. Not the raw pain of a grieving friend. Something harder, more determined. "Cain wants to kill me," he said. "Ashford wants to destroy you. They think they have all the advantages, do they not?" Jake's smile was thin and cold. "They forgot who I used to be, and they do not know who I have become." They slept in the cabin that night, Clara on the bed and Jake in a chair by the door. Neither of them slept well, but they slept together. It was enough. Dawn came gray and cold. Marshal Burke arrived an hour after sunrise, dusty from hard riding. "I got your message," he said, dismounting and handing his horse's reins to Jake. "You are sure about this?" "It is the only way," Clara said. "Ashford is too careful, too well protected. The only weakness in his armor is Ellie. He thinks she is his leverage. He does not realize she is his downfall." Burke considered this. "And the documents?" "Safely hidden, where Ashford will never find them." Clara met the marshal's eyes. "Once Ellie is free, I will give you everything you need to bring him down." Burke looked at Jake. "And you? What is your stake in this?" Jake's expression did not change. "I owe a debt to a man who died, to a woman who deserves better, to myself for every sin I have ever committed." Burke studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded. "The territory has been trying to build a case against Ashford for years. We have suspicions, but no proof. If you can get me that proof, I will personally escort him to a cell in the territorial prison." "And the warrant for Sarah Miller?" Burke reached into his coat and pulled out the folded document. "This warrant was issued by a corrupt judge based on fabricated evidence." He tore it in half. "As far as I am concerned, Sarah Miller never existed." Clara felt tears prick at her eyes. "Thank you." "Do not thank me yet," Burke said. "Getting into Denver is the easy part. Getting out alive is going to be considerably harder." They spent the day preparing. Burke provided information about Ashford's operations in Denver, the locations of his safe houses, the patterns of his guards, the places where Ellie might be held. "She's probably at a boarding house on Larimer Street," Burke said. "Front for trafficking operations. Heavy security. At least 8 men on guard at any time. "How do you know this?" Clara asked. Burke's smile was grim. "I have been investigating Ashford for 2 years. I know more about his organization than he probably realizes." "Then why have you not moved against him?" "Because every time I get close, evidence disappears. Witnesses vanish. Judges dismiss charges for procedural reasons." Burke's expression hardened. "Ashford has friends in high places. The only way to bring him down is with overwhelming proof and overwhelming force." "Which is where I come in," Clara said. "Which is where you come in," Burke agreed. They left at sunset, 3 riders heading northeast toward Denver. The journey took 2 days. 2 days of hard riding through rough country, avoiding main roads and established trails. 2 days of sleeping in shifts and watching the shadows for pursuit. On the second night, Jake found Clara standing alone at the edge of their camp, staring at the distant lights of Denver glowing on the horizon. "Scared?" he asked. "Terrified?" Clara did not look at him. "I have spent 8 years imagining this moment, and now that it is here, I am not sure I am ready." "No one is ever ready for moments like this." Jake stood beside her. "You just do the best you can and hope it is enough." Clara turned to face him. "If something happens to me tomorrow," she said, "if they capture me, kill me, whatever, I need you to promise me something. Anything. Get Ellie out, no matter what happens to me. Get my sister out of that place and somewhere safe." Jake shook his head. "I am not making that promise." "Why not?" "Because nothing is going to happen to you." Jake's voice was firm. "We are going into that building together. We are getting Ellie out together, and we are walking out of Denver together. You cannot know that." "You are right." Jake reached out and took her hands. "But I can know this. I have lost you once. I spent 19 years regretting it. I am not going to lose you again." Clara felt tears slip down her cheeks. "Jake, I love you, Clara." Jake's voice was rough. "I have loved you since we were kids in Tennessee. I loved you through 19 years of not knowing if you were alive or dead, and I will love you until they put me in the ground." Clara closed her eyes. "I do not know if I can love you back. Not the way you deserve. I have spent too many years afraid to let anyone close. I am not asking you to." Jake squeezed her hands. "I am just asking you to let me try to earn it." Clara opened her eyes and looked at him. At this scarred, broken, beautiful man who had waited 19 years for a promise she had never been able to keep. "All right," she said. "We do this together." "Together," Jake agreed. And somewhere in Denver, in a boarding house on Larimer Street, Ellie Hawkins sat in a locked room and prayed that someone would come for her. She had been praying for 8 years. Tomorrow her prayers would finally be answered. There are 2 ways into a fortress: the front door with an army, or the back door with shadows. He always preferred the back door. Denver sprawled across the plain like a queen, confident in her beauty. All brick buildings and paved streets and gas lamps flickering in the evening darkness. The mountains rose behind her like a crown, their peaks still white with snow despite the summer heat below. Jake had not been to Denver in years. The city had changed, grown, become something almost civilized. But underneath the veneer of respectability, the same old sins still flourished. He could see them if he knew where to look. The saloons that served as fronts for gambling dens. The boarding houses that were actually brothels. The respectable businesses that laundered money from less respectable sources. Ashford's territory. They entered the city separately, Burke taking the main road while Jake and Clara circled around to approach from the south. Better not to be seen together until they had no choice. The boarding house on Larimer Street was exactly where Burke had said it would be. A 3-story wooden structure with lace curtains in the windows and a fresh coat of paint on the door. It looked like exactly what it pretended to be, a respectable establishment for single women seeking temporary lodging. The armed men watching from the shadows told a different story. Jake counted 8 of them through his field glasses. 4 on the ground floor, 2 on the upper floors visible through windows, 2 more patrolling the back alley. Professional, alert, dangerous. How do we get past them? Clara whispered. We do not. Jake handed her the field glasses. We go through them. The plan was straightforward. Burke would create a distraction at the front of the building, drawing as many guards as possible to investigate. Jake would enter through the back. Clara would follow once he had cleared the way. Simple, direct, violent. Jake did not like it. Too many variables, too many things that could go wrong. But they were out of time and out of options. Are you ready? He asked Clara. No. Clara's voice was steady despite her fear. But let us do it anyway. Burke's distraction came right on schedule. A fire in a trash heap at the end of the block, accompanied by shouts of alarm. The guards at the front of the building moved to investigate, leaving only 2 men watching the back entrance. Jake moved through the shadows like water through cracks in stone. The first guard never saw him coming. A quick strike to the throat, a hand over the mouth, and the man was unconscious before he could raise an alarm. The second guard was faster. He got his hand on his gun before Jake reached him. But Jake had been doing this longer than the guard had been alive. He caught the man's wrist, twisted, and felt the bones snap. Another strike, and the second guard joined the first on the ground. Clara appeared at his side. Is there another way? She whispered. There was not. Jake pulled open the back door and stepped into darkness. The interior of the boarding house was a maze of corridors and locked doors. Jake moved through it with his gun drawn, checking each corner, listening for footsteps. They found the first prisoner on the second floor, a young woman, barely more than a girl, huddled in a corner of a small room. She looked up at them with hollow eyes that had forgotten how to hope. We are getting you out of here, Clara said gently. All of you. The girl did not respond, just stared. Jake's jaw tightened. How many more like her were locked in these rooms? How many lives had Ashford destroyed for profit? Focus, Clara whispered, seeing his expression. Ellie first. Then we come back for the others. They found Ellie on the 3rd floor, in a room at the end of the hall. The door was locked from the outside. Jake kicked it open without hesitation. The woman inside looked up at the noise. She was thin and hollow-eyed, with dark hair that had gone gray at the temples. She looked 60 years old, despite being barely 30. Then she saw Clara, and something in her face shattered. Clara! The sisters embraced, both of them sobbing. 8 years of separation, of fear, of not knowing if the other was alive or dead, all of it pouring out in a single moment. Jake kept watch at the door, giving them what privacy he could. I thought you forgot me, Ellie was saying. I thought you had abandoned me. Never. Clara held her sister like she would never let go, not for one single day. I have been working to get you out since the moment they took you. I just could not find a way that would not get you killed. Ellie pulled back, her face wet with tears. They told me you were dead, that you had been killed trying to escape. They showed me a body. They lied. Clara wiped the tears from her sister's face. They always lied. But I am here now, and we are leaving this place forever. Jake heard footsteps on the stairs, many of them, moving fast. We have to go, he said. Now! They ran. The back stairs were clear, but not for long. Jake could hear guards converging from multiple directions, drawn by the commotion of their rescue. Burke, Jake said through gritted teeth. Where the hell are you? As if in answer, gunshots erupted from the front of the building. Burke had arrived with reinforcements. Territorial marshals he had secretly gathered for this operation. The guards were caught between 2 forces now, unable to focus on either one. Go, Jake told Clara. Back alley. Horses are waiting. I will cover you. Clara hesitated. Go, Jake repeated. Get Ellie out. I will be right behind you. Clara grabbed her sister's hand and ran. Jake turned to face the guards coming up the stairs. There were 4 of them, armed, angry, desperate. Jake smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. Hello, boys, he said. Let me introduce myself. They used to call me the Revenant. He moved. The first guard went down with a bullet in his shoulder. The second took a pistol butt to the face. The third stumbled backward into the fourth, and both of them tumbled down the stairs. Jake did not wait to see if they would get up. He was already running, following Clara's path through the building and out into the night. The alley was chaos, gunfire everywhere, shouts and screams and the thunder of running feet. Jake found the horses where he had left them. Clara was already mounted, pulling Ellie up behind her. Marshal Burke rode up beside them, his face grim. "Time to go," he said. More of them coming. They galloped through the streets of Denver, 3 horses carrying 4 riders, leaving a trail of chaos in their wake. Behind them, the boarding house was in flames. Whether from Burke's distraction or from something else, Jake did not know and did not care. They had done what they came to do. Ellie was free. Now they just had to survive the ride home. They made camp 10 miles outside Denver, in a rocky canyon that offered shelter from pursuit. Ellie was in shock. She sat by the fire, wrapped in a blanket Clara had brought, staring at nothing. 8 years of captivity did not wash away in a single night. Clara sat with her, holding her hand, talking softly about nothing in particular, about the ranch in Colorado, about the life they would build together, about all the things they would do now that they were finally free. Jake kept watch at the edge of the camp, his eyes scanning the darkness for pursuit. Burke joined him. "That was well done," the marshal said quietly. "I have seen veteran soldiers who could not have done better." "I am not a soldier," Jake said. "No, you are something considerably more dangerous." Burke lit a cigarette. "But you held back. You could have killed those guards. Instead, you just put them down." Jake said nothing. "She is changing you," Burke observed. "The woman? Maybe." Burke smoked in silence for a moment. Then he said, "I received word from Silver Creek before we left. Ashford has been moving his men out of town, heading back to Denver. He knows we rescued Ellie. Almost certainly." Burke's expression was grim. "He will be waiting for us when we return. Then we do not return." Burke raised an eyebrow. "We go around," Jake said. "Back roads, mountain passes. Come at Silver Creek from the west instead of the east. That will add days to the journey. But it will keep us alive." Jake turned to look at Clara, still sitting with her sister by the fire. "She has the evidence. Once we get it to you, Ashford is finished." Burke nodded slowly. "Then we do it your way." Jake looked back at the darkness beyond the fire's light. Somewhere out there, Silas Cain was waiting. Ashford was planning. The forces that had hunted Clara for 8 years were gathering for one final strike. But Jake was not afraid. He had been running from his past for 5 years, from the blood on his hands, from the monster he had become. Now he had something worth fighting for. Someone worth fighting for. Let them come, he thought. Let them all come. He was ready. In the firelight behind him, Clara looked up and caught his eye. She smiled just a little, and something warm bloomed in Jake's chest. For the first time in 19 years, he felt like he was finally coming home. Some battles are fought for victory. Some are fought because there is nowhere left to retreat. They rode for 6 days through mountain passes and hidden valleys, pushing the horses as hard as they dared. Ellie grew stronger with each mile, the color returning to her cheeks, the light slowly coming back to her eyes. She told Clara what she had overheard during her years of captivity. Names, dates, places, details that would flesh out the evidence Clara had already gathered. Details that would ensure Ashford never hurt anyone again. She also told Clara about Crane. "I heard them talking," Ellie said one night by the fire. "Ashford and a man he called Nathaniel. They spoke about you like you were a prize to be won. Ashford called the other man little brother." Clara had suspected as much, but hearing confirmation still made her blood run cold. "He has been watching you for months," Ellie continued, "reporting everything you did, every conversation, every movement." Jake, who had been listening from the edge of the firelight, spoke quietly. "Bill figured it out. That is why they killed him." Silence fell over the camp. When they finally approached Silver Creek from the western mountains, it was clear that everything had changed. Smoke rose from multiple buildings in town. Armed men patrolled the streets openly. The townspeople who should have been going about their daily business were nowhere to be seen. "He has taken the town," Burke said grimly. They made camp in the hills overlooking Silver Creek. From their vantage point, they could see Ashford's men everywhere. 20, at least. Maybe more. And in the center of town, standing on the hotel balcony like a king surveying his domain, was Judge Cornelius Ashford himself. Reverend Crane stood beside him. "They are using the townspeople as hostages," Jake observed. "If we attack, innocent people die. Then we do not attack." Clara's voice was calm despite the fury burning in her eyes. "We draw them out. How? By giving Ashford what he wants." Jake turned to look at her. "Me," Clara said simply. "He wants me. He has wanted me for 8 years. If I walk into that town alone, he will come for me personally. He will not be able to resist." "Absolutely not," Jake said. "It is the only way. It is suicide." Clara shook her head. "It is a calculated risk. Ashford needs me alive to confess to Robert's murder. He will not kill me until he has what he wants." "And what happens after he has your confession?" "He will never get it." Clara's smile was thin. "Because while he is focused on me, you will be getting the evidence to Burke. And Burke will be arresting everyone in Ashford's organization." Jake was shaking his head before she finished speaking. "There has to be another way. There is not." Clara reached out and took his hand. "We have been over this 100 times. Every plan ends the same way. Someone has to walk into that town and face Ashford directly. And it has to be me." "Why?" "Because this is my fight." Clara's voice hardened. "He killed my father. He enslaved my sister. He destroyed my life. I will not let someone else pay the price for my revenge. This is not revenge. This is justice. Is it?" Clara met his eyes without flinching. "Can you honestly tell me you do not want to see Ashford dead? That you do not want to be the one to pull the trigger?" Jake was silent. "I need to do this," Clara said softly, "not for revenge. For closure. For the chance to finally stop running." Jake stood and walked to the edge of the camp. He stood with his back to her for a long moment, looking down at the town where armed men waited to kill everyone he cared about. Then he turned back. "I will go with you. No, not to fight. To talk." Jake's expression was determined. "Ashford thinks he has all the power, but he does not know everything. He does not know about Burke and his marshals. He does not know we have already sent copies of the evidence to newspapers in Denver and San Francisco." Clara stared at him. "We go in together, we face him together. And when his world starts crumbling around him, we walk out together." Clara wanted to argue. Every instinct told her that letting Jake walk into danger was wrong, but she also knew he was right. This was not her fight alone. It had not been her fight alone since the moment Jake had appeared in that alley and chosen to stand beside her. "All right," she said finally. "Together." "Together," Jake agreed. Burke spent the next hour positioning his marshals in the hills around town. 20 men against Ashford's 20. Even odds if it came to a fight. The journalist from Denver was already on his way back to the city with copies of Clara's evidence. By tomorrow, the whole territory would know the truth about Judge Cornelius Ashford. But first, they had to survive tonight. Jake and Clara rode into Silver Creek side by side as the sun began to set. The townspeople watched from behind shuttered windows. Ashford's men tracked their progress with guns drawn but did not fire. They had their orders. Ashford was waiting for them in front of the hotel. He looked exactly as Clara remembered, distinguished and handsome and utterly corrupt. Silas Cain stood beside him. "Miss Hawkins," Ashford said pleasantly, "how good of you to finally accept my invitation. I did not have much choice." Clara dismounted and stood facing him with her chin held high. "You burned half the town to get my attention. A necessary motivation." Ashford's smile never wavered. I have been trying to have this conversation for 8 years. You kept running. I am not running anymore. Clearly. Ashford's eyes flicked to Jake. And you brought your pet killer. How charming. Jake said nothing. His hand rested on his gun, but he made no move to draw. I know what you want, Clara said. You want me to confess to killing Robert Whitmore, to take the blame for a murder you ordered. I want justice, Ashford said smoothly. Robert was a good man who did not deserve to die. Robert was your creature. He tried to kill me when he found out I had taken the ledger books. I defended myself. A likely story. Ashford shook his head sadly. But without those ledger books, it is your word against mine. And I am a territorial judge. You are a runaway servant accused of murder. Clara smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. The ledger books are on their way to Denver as we speak, along with my sister's testimony, along with the evidence Bill Hensley gathered about your brother, the preacher. Ashford's smile flickered. By tomorrow, every newspaper in the territory will be printing the truth about Judge Cornelius Ashford. Clara's voice rang across the silent square. The trafficking, the murders, the bribed officials, all of it. You are bluffing. Am I? Clara gestured toward the hills around the town. There are 20 territorial marshals waiting in those hills. They have warrants for your arrest, your brother's arrest, and the arrest of every man in your organization. Ashford's face had gone pale. You have a choice, Clara continued. Surrender now and face trial, or fight and die here in the street. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Silas Cain stepped forward. I do not care about trials, he said quietly. I do not care about evidence or newspapers or territorial marshals. His eyes fixed on Jake. I care about one thing. The man who killed my brother. Jake met his gaze without flinching. Samuel Cain murdered a family, Jake said. Parents and 3 children. The youngest was 4 years old. He was my brother. That does not change what he did. Silas drew his gun in a motion too fast to follow. No, Jake said. Let us do this properly. Just you and me. Silas hesitated. You have been waiting 12 years for this moment, Jake continued. Are you going to waste it on a quick shot in a crowded street? Or do you want to face me man to man? Silas considered for a moment. Then he smiled and holstered his weapon. All right, bounty hunter, man to man. They moved to the center of the street. The townspeople pressed back against the buildings, clearing space. Clara wanted to scream, wanted to grab Jake and run. But she knew it would do no good. This was a debt that had been waiting 12 years to be paid. All she could do was watch. The 2 men faced each other across 20 feet of dusty street. Silas stood loose and ready, his hand hovering near his gun. Jake was utterly still, a statue carved from stone and silence. Any last words? Silas asked. Jake nodded slowly. Your brother begged before he died. Begged for mercy. Begged for his life, and I gave him the same mercy he gave that family in Wyoming. Silas's face contorted with rage. He drew. Jake drew faster. 2 shots rang out as one. Silas staggered backward, a red bloom spreading across his chest. He looked down at the wound with something like surprise. Then he looked at Jake. At least, he whispered, at least you remember his name. Jake's voice was quiet. I remember all of them. Silas Cain fell. For a moment, no one moved. Then chaos erupted. Ashford shouted orders to his men. Burke's marshals came pouring down from the hills. Gunfire exploded across the square as the 2 forces clashed. Jake grabbed Clara and pulled her behind a water trough. We have to get out of here. Wait! Clara pointed toward the hotel. Ashford is running. The judge had abandoned his men. He was sprinting toward a carriage waiting at the end of the street, his white gloves flashing in the fading light. Clara ran after him. She caught up to him just as he reached the carriage. She grabbed his arm and spun him around. Where do you think you are going? Ashford's mask of civility had finally cracked. His face was twisted with fear and rage. You stupid girl! You think you have won? I have connections all over this territory. I will be back on the bench within a year. Clara shook her head. Your connections are already being arrested. Your brother is in custody. Your organization is finished." Ashford lunged for her throat. Clara had been waiting for this. 19 years of running, of hiding, of being afraid. All of it came down to this moment. She stepped aside and let his momentum carry him past her. As he stumbled, she drew the pistol Jake had given her and pressed it to the back of his head. "One reason," she said quietly. "Give me one reason not to pull this trigger." Ashford froze. "If you kill me, you will hang." "Maybe." Clara's voice was steady. "But it might be worth it." For a long moment she stood there with the gun pressed to his skull. The temptation to pull the trigger was overwhelming. This man had destroyed her family, had enslaved her sister, had hunted her across the frontier for 8 years. One bullet, and it would all be over. But then she thought about Jake, about Ellie, about the life she wanted to build once this was finished. She thought about the difference between justice and vengeance. Slowly, she lowered the gun. "You are going to trial," she said. "You are going to face every one of your victims. And when they hang you, I am going to be there watching." Marshal Burke appeared beside her. "Clara Jane Hawkins," he said formally. "I need your statement. And this man needs to be placed under arrest." Clara handed him the gun. "He is all yours, Marshal." Burke's men took Ashford into custody. The judge did not struggle. He seemed to have aged 20 years in the past few minutes. Clara watched them lead him away. Then she turned and found Jake standing behind her. He was bleeding from a wound in his shoulder, but he was smiling. "You did not shoot him." "I wanted to." Clara walked into his arms. "God, I wanted to. I know." Jake held her close. "I am proud of you." Clara closed her eyes and let herself rest against his chest. The sounds of the battle were fading now. Burke's men had the upper hand. It was over. After 19 years, it was finally over. Some journeys take a lifetime to complete. Some end exactly where they began. This was both. 1 month later, autumn had come to Silver Creek. The trees in the mountains had turned gold and crimson. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the first hints of winter on the breeze. The town had begun to heal. Buildings repaired, businesses reopened, the marks of violence slowly fading. Jake sat on the porch of his cabin, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. His shoulder still ached from the wound he had taken in the final battle, but it was healing well. Clara had seen to that personally. Clara. She emerged from the cabin now, 2 cups of coffee in her hands. She had changed in the month since Ashford's arrest. The constant tension had faded from her shoulders. The fear that had lived in her eyes for so long had finally begun to recede. She was beautiful. She had always been beautiful. But now there was a peace in her face that made Jake's heart ache with something he could not quite name. "News from Denver," she said, handing him a cup. "Good or bad?" "Good." Clara settled into the chair beside him. "Ashford's trial is set for next month. The territorial governor himself is overseeing the proceedings. And Crane turned state's witness in exchange for a reduced sentence." Clara's smile was grim. "He is spending the rest of his life in the territorial prison, but at least he is talking." Jake nodded slowly. "What about the others?" "The victims. 23 have been located and freed." Clara's voice softened. "Including the girl we found in the boarding house. She is living with a family in San Francisco now. That is good." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the light fade from the sky. "Marshal Burke sent something for you," Clara said finally. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper. Jake opened it carefully. Inside was a badge. "Territorial Marshal," it read. "He wants me to join his office," Clara explained. "Says I have the skills and the motivation." Jake studied the badge for a moment. Then he set it on the porch rail. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I would think about it." Clara looked at him. "What do you think I should do?" "I think that is your decision to make." Clara was quiet for a moment. "I spent 19 years running," she said finally. "Hiding, surviving. I never had the chance to think about what I actually wanted. And now? Now I want to stop running." Clara reached out and took his hand. "I want to build something, a home, a life, something that is mine." Jake squeezed her hand. "This place is yours," he said, "for as long as you want it." Clara turned to look at him. "Is that a proposal, Jacob McAllister?" Jake laughed, surprising himself. "I suppose it might be." He met her eyes. "If you will have me." Clara was quiet for a long moment. Jake felt his heart pounding in his chest. Then she smiled. "I have been waiting 19 years for you to ask me that." She leaned over and kissed him, soft and sweet and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, the stars were coming out overhead. "We should do this properly," Jake said. "A real wedding, with a preacher and everything." "Where are we going to find a preacher?" Jake grinned. "I hear there is an opening in Silver Creek." Clara laughed. It was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. They were married 2 weeks later, on a crisp autumn morning with the mountains blazing gold around them. The ceremony was small. Ellie stood beside Clara, tears streaming down her face. Marshal Burke had ridden down from Denver to serve as a witness. A few of the townspeople who had stood with them during the battle filled out the small gathering. The service was held outdoors beside the creek that ran through Jake's property. The same creek where Clara had hidden from Ashford's men all those months ago. The same creek that reminded Jake of another creek, in another time, in a place called Tennessee. "Do you take this woman?" the new preacher asked. "I do," Jake said. "I have taken her every day for 19 years. Clara's eyes shimmered with tears. "And do you take this man?" "I do," Clara said, "for all the days we lost, and all the days still to come." The preacher smiled. "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Colorado, I pronounce you husband and wife." Jake kissed his bride while the small crowd cheered. 1 year later, the cabin had been expanded. New rooms for Ellie, who had decided to stay in Silver Creek and open a small dress shop. New fencing for the growing herd. A garden behind the house where Clara grew vegetables and herbs. Jake stood on the porch, watching the sunset as he did every evening. But tonight was different. Tonight, Clara stood beside him with her hand resting on her rounded belly. "He is kicking," she said softly. "How do you know it is a he?" "I just know." Clara smiled. "A boy with his father's stubbornness and his mother's common sense." Jake laughed. "God help him. He will have us." Clara leaned against his shoulder. "That is more than either of us had." Jake put his arm around her and held her close. In the distance, the sun touched the mountains and began its slow descent. The sky blazed with color, reds and golds and purples stretching from horizon to horizon. "Are you happy?" Clara asked. Jake thought about the question. He thought about the girl he had kissed by Sweetwater Creek all those years ago. About the 19 years of searching and loss and violence that had followed. About the scars he carried, inside and out. He thought about Bill Hensley, buried under the oak tree behind the cabin. About the granddaughter who had finally come to visit his grave last spring, a bright-eyed girl who reminded Jake of everything Bill might have been. He thought about the monster he had become, and the man he was becoming instead. "Yes," he said finally. "I am happy." Clara smiled and kissed his cheek. "Good, because supper is getting cold." She turned and walked into the cabin, leaving the door open behind her. Jake stood for a moment longer, watching the last light fade from the sky. Then he followed her inside. The door closed behind him. Outside, the Colorado stars emerged one by one, countless points of light scattered across the velvet darkness. A coyote called somewhere in the hills. The creek that ran past the cabin murmured its endless song. And in the cabin, a lamp was lit. Its warm glow spilled through the windows, a small beacon of light against the vast wilderness. A home, finally. After 19 years, after fire and blood and loss, after everything that had tried to tear them apart, they had found their way back to each other. Some loves arrive on time, gentle as spring wind. Others must cross fire and blood, loss and years to find their way home. Both are worth the journey. But the loves that survive the fire, the ones that are tempered by loss and strengthened by years, those are the loves that last forever. Jake and Clara had earned their happily ever after, and they would hold on to it with everything they had. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.